The moment I told my husband I'd been fired, he didn't even flinch. No concern, no shock, just pure boiling rage. "Of course you got fired," he snapped, slamming his laptop shut. "You've always acted like you know better than everyone. Maybe now you'll learn something." I stood there frozen, still in my work clothes, holding the straps of my purse like they were the only things keeping me upright. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, imagining how he'd pull me into his arms, tell me we'd figure it out together. But this wasn't that moment. This wasn't that man. The truth? I hadn't been fired. I'd been promoted. Unexpectedly, joyfully, after years of quiet, thankless work. But as I walked home that evening, thinking of how Brian had grown more distant, more distracted, I felt something in me hesitate. What if he didn't take it well? What if he resented me for getting ahead? For earning more than him? He was raised in a household where the man was the provider, the one who built the foundation, as his mother used to say. I'd heard it so many times, her voice echoing in our living room like some outdated mantra. Still, I didn't expect him to explode the way he did. I remember how he looked at me like I was some liability, some deadweight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Do you even understand the position you've put me in? How do you think we're going to pay the bills now?" he kept yelling, pacing across the room, not once asking how I was feeling or what had happened. I said nothing, not because I didn't want to defend myself, but because I physically couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, like my body instinctively knew I needed to stay silent. And maybe that was a good thing. Because if I had told him the truth right then, that I'd been promoted, that I'd be earning more than ever before, I would have missed what came next. I would have missed the cracks beneath the surface that were finally starting to show. Instead, I just stood there as he raged on, telling me how I'd never contributed anything real, how all I did was shuffle papers while he built actual things that mattered. I barely remember how the rest of that evening went. I think I went to the bathroom and stood under the shower for half an hour, letting the water scald my skin as if it could wash away the humiliation, the confusion, the fear. That night, he slept on the couch without a word. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. There had been signs, I realized. Signs I had ignored for too long. The late nights at work, the secretive glances at his phone, the way he stopped meeting my eyes when we spoke. And now, his total lack of empathy, his coldness. It wasn't just about the lie anymore. Something else was going on, something darker. And I was starting to feel it rise beneath my skin, the instinct to survive, the instinct to know the truth before it destroyed me first. Looking back, the signs had been there long before I ever uttered a word about being fired. They weren't glaring red flags, at least not at first. Just small things. The way Brian started coming home later and later, always with a vague excuse. The way his phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now always face down, locked tight. Or how he'd started skipping our Saturday breakfasts, something we'd done religiously for years, with nothing more than a shrug and a maybe next time. I told myself it was just stress. His construction firm had taken on a massive downtown project, and he was working more than usual. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because the alternative, the creeping suspicion that the man I'd shared a bed with for 10 years might be slipping away, was too painful to face. But the moment that lodged itself into my memory, the one I kept playing over and over again in my mind, happened 2 months before I tested him. I'd gotten off work early one Friday. My team had wrapped a product launch ahead of schedule, and I thought it'd be sweet to surprise Brian, cook his favorite dinner, open a bottle of wine, bring back a little piece of us that had been missing lately. I let myself into the house, quietly, thinking I'd catch him working in the living room. But as soon as I opened the front door, I heard his voice coming from down the hallway. He was on the phone, speaking in a tone I hadn't heard before, serious, clipped, almost rehearsed. "No, she doesn't suspect anything yet," he said, followed by a long pause. "We just need a little more time." And then he laughed. Not the warm, playful laugh I used to know. This was something else. Cold, detached, almost cruel. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the doorframe, my heart pounding in my ears. He was talking about me. I knew it. I didn't hear the other person's voice. Maybe it was on speaker, maybe not. But I could feel the weight of the conversation settle on my chest like a stone. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, as if nothing had happened, he walked out of the bedroom, saw me, and smiled. Kissed me on the cheek like it was any ordinary day. I smiled back, went into the kitchen, started boiling pasta, but something in me cracked that evening. A quiet fracture, invisible on the outside, but spreading quickly underneath the surface. From that day on, I started watching him differently, listening more carefully, picking up on the subtle shifts in his behavior, the way he avoided talking about the future, the way he grew impatient when I asked about his day, the little lies he told without even realizing I'd caught them. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being paranoid. My gut was screaming at me, and I was finally listening. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning the slow death of something while still pretending it was alive. I kept telling myself to wait, to collect more signs, to be sure, until that moment in the hallway after my fake firing, when the last of my illusions finally fell apart. That's when I knew something bigger was happening, something I hadn't even begun to imagine. But I was about to find out, and once I did, there would be no going back. It was around 2 in the afternoon when I heard the front door open. I had stayed home from work that day, claiming to feel unwell. Truthfully, I just needed space to think. Brian believed I was still unemployed, broken, vulnerable, afraid to face the world. He had no idea I was still working, no idea I'd just been promoted, no idea I was using the time to pull myself together, quietly, carefully. I froze when I heard not one, but 2 voices enter the house. The second voice didn't belong to a coworker or a friend. It belonged to Linda, my mother-in-law. I stepped silently into the hallway, standing just beyond the crack of the guest room door. I knew I shouldn't listen, but something about the way they spoke, so casually in the middle of a weekday, made my skin crawl. So, Linda's voice rang sharp and familiar. Why the sudden midday visit? Everything all right? It's all going exactly as planned, Brian replied, sounding almost pleased. She told me she got fired yesterday. Totally devastated, just like you predicted. I covered my mouth with my hand, willing myself not to gasp. Finally, Linda said, exhaling with satisfaction. She won't have any choice now. She'll have to agree to our terms. My knees buckled slightly. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear what came next. She's completely dependent on me now, Brian continued. Selling the house is just a matter of time. Linda let out a smug little chuckle. See, I told you that girl was never right for you. Too ambitious, too independent. You really think she'd be with you if it weren't for your father's house? It felt like being punched in the chest. That house had been our home for a decade. I'd invested so much of myself into it, my time, my money, my heart. And now they were planning to sell it like I was just some tenant they'd finally tricked into leaving. Don't start, Mom, Brian said with a sigh. We already talked about this. And what about Claire? Linda asked. When are you going to tell her it's time? Claire. The name hit me like ice water down my spine. Claire Jennings. I knew who she was, vaguely. Mark's girlfriend before the accident. Mark, Brian's older brother, who died in a car crash 3 years ago. Claire had disappeared after the funeral. I had no idea Brian had kept in touch, let alone. She's ready, Brian said, voice suddenly gentler. The baby's doing great. Claire says he's growing fast. Already looks just like Mark. My stomach twisted violently. I'll adopt him as soon as the divorce goes through, Brian continued, almost like he was discussing a business deal. He'll be my son. Our son. I couldn't breathe. Linda purred. Just think how happy Claire will be when she hears the house is going up for sale. She's waited so long for this. My ears were ringing. My vision blurred. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a coordinated replacement. They weren't just planning to leave me. They were planning to erase me. And the worst part was, I had no idea how long this had been going on. No clue how many smiles, how many kisses had been lies, rehearsed, strategic, calculated. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was plotting. I always knew Claire was the one for you, Linda said, her voice melting into that sickly sweet tone she reserved for people she actually liked. You two are perfect together. It's just a shame you met her too late after you married that one. That one. That's how she referred to me. Not Rachel. Not your wife. Just that one. A placeholder. An obstacle. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from making a sound. My entire body was shaking, but I couldn't stop listening. I needed to hear everything. Let's not get carried away, Brian muttered. We still have to make sure Rachel doesn't fight us on the divorce. She won't, Linda replied confidently. Not if you handle it right. Remind her she has nowhere to go. No job. No savings. She'll fold. I clenched my fists, every nerve in my body screaming. They thought I was powerless, that I was trapped. But I wasn't. Not yet. Not entirely. And what if she doesn't fold? Linda asked. What if she gets a lawyer? Brian's voice dropped, low and calm. Too calm. Then we hit her with the infidelity angle. I nearly stumbled backward. What infidelity? Linda asked. Doesn't matter, Brian said. I've got a few old photos from that conference she went to 2 years ago. Just her with some colleagues. But they can be interpreted the right way. Enough to raise doubt. You're a clever boy, Linda cooed. Just like your father. But he wasn't done. If that doesn't work, Brian continued, we accuse her of leaking internal documents. She worked with sensitive client files. She brought stuff home all the time. I'll say I caught her trying to sell data to competitors. I felt my knees give way, and I sank slowly to the floor. My hands were ice cold. My husband, the man who once held my hair back while I threw up from food poisoning, who painted our bedroom walls while I picked the color, was planning to destroy my life from the inside out. He was going to lie in court. He was going to accuse me of things I never did, just to push me out. For Claire. And a baby who wasn't even his. Claire, the quiet, soft-spoken woman I remembered only in flashes from Mark's memorial. She had seemed kind, fragile. I never imagined she would come back into our lives like this. Not as the woman replacing me. Not as the mother of the child my husband planned to call his own. How's the baby doing? Brian asked then, his voice suddenly light. Almost happy. Strong, Linda answered proudly. Claire says he's growing fast. Looks just like Mark. Same eyes, same laugh. You'll see soon enough. The room started spinning. They were building a new family, Brian, Claire, the baby, and Linda, of course. Always Linda. The perfect little unit. And in their minds, I was already gone. Just paperwork. Just one final conversation. I'll tell her tonight, Brian said. She's already on edge after losing her job. It's the perfect time. I'll play the sympathetic card. Say it's better for both of us. Offer her a bit of cash to walk away. Linda snorted. Push the pity. Make her feel like a burden. She'll cave. Women like her always do. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. But even through the pain, I smiled to myself, just barely, because they didn't know the truth. I hadn't been fired. I had been promoted, and they had no idea that their plan was already falling apart. I stayed crouched behind the door long after they stopped talking. I didn't move when I heard the couch creak or the front door close behind Linda. I just sat there, hugging my knees, heart hammering so loud I thought it would give me away. My body was frozen, but my mind was burning. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And I'd walked right into it, unarmed, unaware, until now. But I wasn't going to be a casualty. Not quietly. Not ever. That night, I didn't speak to Brian. He acted like nothing had happened. He poured himself a drink, watched the game, glanced at me with that carefully neutral expression that now seemed so grotesque. I didn't look at him. I didn't trust myself to, because if I did, I might break the illusion. And I needed that illusion, at least for a little while longer. In bed, I lay still with my eyes open, my back to him. He fell asleep quickly, like always, as if the day hadn't included plotting to erase me from his life. I listened to his breathing and planned. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise. I didn't go to work. Not right away. I went to the storage closet where we kept old documents, warranties, receipts, contracts, tax papers. I pulled everything I could find. I needed proof, evidence that I had contributed to that house, that I had invested in it with my own money, not just my presence. The new water heater? My bonus paid for it. The custom cabinetry in the kitchen? My design, my deposit. I dug out bank statements, delivery invoices, furniture receipts. I packed them all into a box, then into a bag, and drove across town to the only person I trusted, Emily. Emily Barnes wasn't just a colleague. She was my friend. For years, we'd been each other's sanity during late nights at the office. She knew my coffee order, my birthday, the name of the stray cat I once tried to adopt and failed miserably. Most importantly, she'd never once betrayed me, not even with gossip. And that made her invaluable now. When I showed up at her door, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at me for a moment, then stepped aside. "I need a favor," I whispered. "Say no more," she said. In her kitchen, I placed the documents on her table. "If anything happens, if I disappear, if I stop answering calls, give this to my lawyer." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not being paranoid," I added, seeing the concern in her face. "But I can't take any risks." Emily nodded slowly. "You're scaring me a little. But okay, whatever you need." I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a bit. I hadn't told her everything. Not about Claire, not about the baby, not yet, but she understood enough. That something was deeply wrong, that I needed her. And for now, that was enough. As I drove back home, I passed by the park where Brian and I used to walk on Sundays. I remembered how he used to hold my hand, how he once looked at me like I was his entire world. That man, that version of him, was dead. The one waiting at home for me now. He was a stranger in familiar skin. And tonight, that stranger was going to sit me down, look me in the eye, and ask me to disappear. He had no idea that I was already planning how to make sure it would be him who lost everything. When I walked through the front door that evening, I knew it was coming. The conversation, the performance. He'd rehearsed it in his mind. I could see it on his face. That forced concern, the artificial heaviness in his shoulders. Brian Carter was about to pretend to be the good guy in his own betrayal. "Hey," he said, voice low, careful. "We should talk." I gave him a tired smile, just enough to look worn down, just enough to keep him confident. "Sure," I replied, dropping my bag by the door. "What's going on?" He gestured to the living room, already set up like a scene from a play. He dimmed the lights. 2 glasses of wine sat on the coffee table. He even had a blanket draped over the armrest, like this was going to be some soft, mutual discussion, like he was doing me a favor by dismantling my life gently. I sat. He took the armchair across from me, lacing his fingers together, letting out a sigh so theatrical I nearly laughed. "Rachel," he began, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About where we are. And I think we've grown apart." I kept my eyes on the wine glass, nodding slightly. "Okay. I don't want this to be ugly," he continued, leaning forward. "I don't want lawyers or courtrooms. I just think it's time we both admitted this marriage isn't working anymore." He sounded heartbroken, like he was the victim, like this decision was tearing him apart inside. "I mean, with you being out of work now," he added gently, "maybe this is a good time for a fresh start. For both of us." My stomach turned. I let my bottom lip tremble, just slightly. "Are you saying divorce?" He nodded, reaching for his wine like he deserved to take a victory sip. "Yeah, but amicable. Civil, I don't want to fight. I'm willing to help you get on your feet. You'll need a place to stay, obviously, and some money to get settled. I tilted my head, just enough to seem fragile. You'd do that for me? Of course, he said, placing a hand on his chest like some kind of savior. I care about you, Rachel. I don't think we're right for each other anymore. We've both changed. He paused for effect, then added, and the house, it's legally mine. It was left to me by my father, but I want to be fair. I'll offer you a settlement, something to help with rent for a few months. I blinked, let out a shaky breath. How much? He named a number. It was laughable, a fraction of what I'd invested into that home. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I stared at him like I was seeing him for the first time. I thought we'd try harder, I whispered. I thought we were stronger than this. Brian reached out, touched my hand like a man playing a role he no longer cared about. I'm sorry, but this is the best path forward. I promise. And right then, I gave him what he wanted. I nodded slowly, eyes misty, lips pressed tight in defeat. Okay, I said. I'll think about it. He exhaled, visibly relieved. But behind my silence, behind the trembling breath and the wet lashes, I was already building my case. Because he didn't want lawyers. But I was going to bring the best one in town. The next morning, I left the house before Brian even stirred. He was still snoring on the couch, buried beneath a blanket like a child hiding from consequences. I didn't leave a note this time. No explanation. No polite goodbye. Just silence. Let him wonder. Downtown Portland was just waking up when I stepped into the old brick building where Monica Bell's office was tucked between a florist and a tax accountant. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and ink. I sat in the waiting room for 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime, rehearsing what to say. But when Monica opened the door and called my name, I stood up, walked in, and told her everything. Not everything, exactly. I left out Claire, the baby, the betrayal so deep it made my voice crack. But I gave her enough. Enough for a lawyer to see the shape of the battlefield ahead, the inherited house, the years of shared expenses, the receipts and bank statements, the way he wanted a divorce, fast and quiet, with a sum so low it was insulting. Monica listened without judgment. Her face was calm, analytical, her pen gliding over yellow legal pad like it had been trained for war. You've been married 10 years, she asked, her tone precise. 12, I corrected. 10 legally. 2 before that. She nodded, made a note. Any children? No. Proof of financial contributions to the home? I have receipts, invoices, bank statements. Everything. Furniture. Renovations. Fixtures. She leaned back, folded her hands. Rachel, you have a case. A strong one. But I need you to understand something. If we go forward with this, there's no turning back. It won't be pretty. He's going to fight dirty. I looked her straight in the eye. He already is. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Then, let's get to work. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Lighter. I still had a mountain to climb. But for the first time in days, the weight on my chest had eased. I wasn't flailing in the dark anymore. I had someone in my corner. Someone who saw the pieces clearly and knew how to play them. I went straight to the office after that. No more hiding. I walked through the doors with my head high, greeted my team, sat down at my desk, and opened the department dashboard like nothing had happened. Brian thought I was unemployed, lost, vulnerable. But I was back. Fully. My phone buzzed around lunch. A text from him. Hope your interviews went well. Let me know when you're ready to talk more about next steps. Next steps. I almost laughed. He had no idea I'd already taken them. I replied with a simple, will do. That afternoon, I met with my team, reviewed quarterly goals, scheduled one-on-ones, and signed off on a new client project. I was efficient, focused, unshakable. And when I finally walked out of the building at sunset, I knew something had shifted permanently inside me. I wasn't the same woman who cried in the hallway, who shook in silence while her husband planned her erasure. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone stronger, sharper, ready. He wanted me to vanish quietly. But now, I was preparing to take everything back on my terms. Brian was waiting for me when I got home. He was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, trying to look composed. But the twitch in his jaw, the slight shift in his weight, those told the real story. He was nervous. "Hey," he said, casual, like we were roommates discussing groceries. "You got a minute?" I hung my coat, slowly, then turned to face him. "Sure." He nodded toward the living room. We sat opposite each other again, that same setup from before. The couch, the wine, the practiced solemnity. He hadn't changed the scene. He thought the first performance had worked, that I had accepted his script. "I've been thinking," he began. "I want to finalize things soon. The divorce, the paperwork, get everything settled so we can both move on." I nodded, keeping my expression soft. "Okay." He blinked. "So, you agree?" "I'm not fighting the divorce," I said gently, "but I do want to understand what's fair. So I've spoken with someone." He froze. "Someone?" "A lawyer." His eyes narrowed. "Why would you need a lawyer? I'm offering a generous settlement. We can handle this ourselves." I tilted my head. "You said the house was legally yours, right?" "It is," he said quickly, "but we've both lived there for over a decade. I've invested money. I have receipts. I just want to make sure it's fair." He laughed, sharp and defensive. "Rachel, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. You lived here. That's not the same as owning it." "I paid for the kitchen remodel," I said softly. "The bathroom tiles, the appliances, all from my accounts. I just want that acknowledged." Brian stood up, pacing now. "I don't want this to get ugly." "Then don't insult me with a number that barely covers 3 months of rent." He turned toward me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. I saw it, the flash of anger, of panic. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being smart. You taught me that, remember? Plan ahead. Protect your assets." He ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting. "You really want to do this? Get lawyers involved? You think that's a good idea?" "I think it's necessary," I replied. "You said you wanted things to be fair. This is how fairness works." He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, as if trying to recalculate, reframe me in his mind. I was no longer the fragile wife he thought he'd broken. I was something else now. A problem. "So what are you going to ask for?" he muttered. "Half the house." "I don't want half," I said. "Just what I put in. And maybe a little more for the time you wasted lying to me." His jaw clenched. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. And in that silence, I knew he was finally afraid. He thought I would break. He didn't expect me to sharpen. The divorce went through 6 weeks later. Not quietly. Not quickly. Brian dragged his feet once he realized I wasn't going to play dead. His lawyer, probably the same smug friend he bragged about to his mother, tried every trick in the book. But Monica was sharper, smarter, ruthless when she needed to be. She had a copy of every receipt, every transfer, every signature I'd ever made on that house. We didn't go after more than what was fair, but we made sure Brian couldn't keep what wasn't his. In the end, I walked away with a respectable settlement and full legal recognition of my contributions. Not just financially, but as a partner who had invested years of her life into a shared home, into building something real, before he decided to burn it down. The last time I saw him, we were signing papers in a sterile conference room downtown. Claire wasn't there, but I could feel her ghost behind his shoulder, quiet, passive, waiting to move in the moment I was gone. Brian didn't meet my eyes. Not once. When it was over, I stood, tucked the pen into my bag, and said, "You always underestimated me." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I saw it in his face. Regret, or maybe just disbelief that the story he had written for me didn't end the way he planned. I moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. Not fancy, not big, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, I kept every light on. Not out of fear, but because I could. No one to tell me I was being dramatic. No one to call me a burden. Just silence. Peaceful. Earned. Word got around that Claire and Brian were having adjustment issues. Apparently, things weren't as idyllic as they'd imagined. Raising a child wasn't as simple as smiling for photos and pretending love could be transplanted. Linda tried to help, of course. She always did, like micromanaging other people's lives. But I heard through Emily that the tension was building. That money was tighter than expected. That Claire hadn't quite fit in the way Linda had hoped. None of it surprised me, because their life was built on lies, and lies don't hold foundations for long. I don't spend my days checking in on them. I don't stalk social media or linger in bitterness. I've rebuilt from the ground up in my own way. Slowly, deliberately. My job is steady. My name is respected. I eat alone some nights, but I've learned that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Sometimes it's healing. I've taken up boxing classes on Saturdays. I've gone back to reading poetry. I call my sister more often. I've even started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. There are pieces of me I thought were lost, but they were just buried under years of being small, of making room for someone else's ego. And now I take up all the space I need. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being underestimated is the most dangerous gift life can hand you. Because when you rise, when you fight back, no one sees it coming. Brian thought I would crumble. Instead, I became unshakable,